Hello.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Heresh. I'm incident responder at Truesec, and mainly focusing on network forensics and network infrastructure during incidents. And this is...
Yeah, and I've been a digital forensic investigator for a few years, but I recently moved to the Swedish police, so now I'm a cybercrime investigator. But it's going to relate to the work that we did during the past year, mainly.
Exactly.
We dealt with quite a lot of ransomware incidents with the threat actor Akira, or affiliates using the Akira ransomware as a service. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yep. And just go ahead.
So what you see here is what a lot of companies and organizations have met when they log into their systems. It's not a great day. It's not a great way to start your day. It's the note that the Akira ransomware leaves on every system. Yep. So it's an indicator that that system, and most likely all clients, all computers, all servers, have most likely been encrypted. Yep. And I have censored out the unique identifier for this specific victim, but otherwise it's a real screenshot taken from a ransomware incident. All of the text is actually identical in everyone. They just changed the ID, so we think they distribute them when they.
And they want to make sure that you see this. So sometimes they even print it for you. So that you.
yeah, we see in the printers.
Yeah.
So yeah, what is Akira and what is ransomware as a service? Ransomware as a service pretty much means that Akira, they are hosting some kind of service. So everyone that is want to do ransomware but don't really have the tools needed, they maybe don't really know how to get into the systems, how to actually encrypt. They can use Akira or they can use Lockbit or any other of these services. And then Akira, they take a cut of it, and then you or whoever is doing the crime, they will take the other part of the money. And the money they gain is through extortion. So when they encrypt it, they ask, like I showed before, they ask them to contact you to negotiate a price to unencrypt the systems, pretty much. And what you see here, I'm going to talk about it a bit later on as well, is just a screenshot of their leak site on the darknet. They have posted about 350 victims. They've been active for maybe 1.5 years now, and still active.
Something like that. Yeah.
And we have done about 10 cases last year.
A little bit more, but yeah. No.
Yeah, you've done a bit more.
Yeah. That's.
And they have some ties to an older ransomware group called Conti as well, which was dissolved, and there was a leak by someone from the inside.
Yeah.
Quite a good rabbit hole to go into if you're bored.
Yeah, definitely. So Conti was a mix between Ukrainians and Russians, and they got dissolved during, actually when the war started. Yeah. Should we go? Yep.
Yeah. And the talk is pretty much going to go through each of these stages. So this is what we call a kill chain. So each stage of the attack or each activity done by the threat actor is represented by one of the circles. Yep. So we're going to go through all of them with a little bit more focus on the initial access because it's super interesting. But I also want to say that what I told before is, well, they have had over 300 victims, right? And we have done 10 different cases, but and this is just one picture, but almost every single incident looks identical. They are very, very, very similar from start to end. So that's why we can do this type of presentation where we pretty much show them what they are doing, or show you what they are doing. But yeah, go ahead. Right. How do they get into the system?
Yeah, so we usually talk about the initial access when we talk about cybersecurity incidents, and that's a little bit confusing because you have initial access, you have patient zero, and all these things. And initial access means basically how did they obtain the information or the know-how to get into your environment. And the initial access in our case was through the Cisco VPN, as we have seen. But during our investigations, we identified the Cisco VPN as the patient zero, which is actually the first compromised device that it got into. So So initial access, Viktor, patient 0 could be the same device, but it could also be different. So what we did when we had done a bunch of these Akira cases, we were kind of puzzled because they got in, and in some of the cases, we really didn't have any logs to do any good investigation as of the network part of it, the initial access or the how they actually got a foothold into the environment. But we run into one incident where they actually had logs from their VPN device. And this one was really puzzling because we saw that the threat actor had actually compromised 8 different accounts, which is not really that usual for this type of attacks. Usually you have 1 or 2 accounts that they compromise. And what was even more intriguing about this one was that all of these accounts were unique in that sense that they didn't use the same password, because that's also one of the cases in many incidents that different usernames use the same password. Because it's, yeah, you're not so unique when you choose your password, banana22. But this was the case here. We compared the hashes of the passwords because we were inside there, and we could see that these didn't match, and the username convention was not really anything that was typical for any of the usernames. They use different conventions for each username. And in the logs, we didn't see any signs of brute force, which is something that you can pretty clearly see if that has been taking place.
So this means, right, that the threat actor, they just logged into VPN.
Yeah, they just logged in.
Just like any other user.
Yeah, exactly, which was really, really strange. And we also, the next thing that we looked for is, has it been anything for sale? Because sometimes an organization gets compromised by a phishing scam or something, and then there are credentials for sale, but nothing in this case. So we started investigating this a little bit more, trying to figure out there must be something else. So, yeah, how did they obtain the VPN credentials? And while doing our investigation, we kind of got this old CVE. And yeah, this CVE is from 2020, so it's more than 4 years old. And what it says here is that if you successfully compromise or exploit a device with this CVE, it will give the attacker access to retrieve memory content. What it doesn't say is that you will get credentials in clear text, but yeah, that's what we found out later on. And also, just to be clear, when we did this talk before and when we did an investigation, there were no publicly known exploit for this. The only thing that we know was that there was this Russian company that actually reported this and had found this exploit, but there was no POC for it, so nobody has used it, and it was not known to be used in the wild, as you usually say. And we started to investigate this a little bit more, and this is actually from the actual incident. It just shows that what kind of caught our attention, and it's that the green fields there, that's a successful user login, and the red one is a compromised, a threat actor successful login with the same account as the green one, but coming from a different IP address, usually in some other country. So when we did this comparison between successful logins and malicious logins, and we could see a pattern here, that the user had logged in, and within a half an hour later on, the threat actor logs in with the same account. And this pattern continued for the 8 different accounts. So this got us a little bit more sure that this is the case. So we did some our own analysis. We did memory dumps of a firewall, and saw that you can actually find credentials in clear text in these devices. And then also in one particular case, when we had in March this year, where the IT admin actually did a good thing. They didn't unplug the cables of the firewall, which you could do, unless it is the power cable, right? So that firewall was intact forensically, and we did a memory dump of that. And in the memory dump, we actually found the working exploit that Akira had used to compromise it. So, and what was interesting with that is that was actually when we talked to Cisco about this, the Cisco PCERT, and they could confirm that this is the actual exploit that was reported back in 2020 when this was made public. And
you can also say that, because that's quite interesting, the company that reported the vulnerability, they are under US sanctions for working with the Russian state.
Exactly. So we don't really know how that exploit got in the hands of Akira, but there could be some ties. It could also be that somebody moved to Akira from working on the right side. You never know.
We don't know.
Yeah, and we have a blog post about this. We can go read in more details. We're just doing the speed run here, but and that's how we kind of figured out that this is what they have done. And when we looked back on our 10 or 11 different Akira cases, we saw that all of the firewalls were actually vulnerable to this, had this vulnerability. So that was.
And we also saw from the forensic investigation done in those that the first activity is coming from something on the VPN network.
Exactly.
So it really
it
kind of confirms the theory.
Confirms everything. So once they got in, then the next step in the kill chain takes place.
Exactly. So now they have managed to log in to the VPN as a normal user, and they got the credentials from using the exploit. So now they're inside the network with their own computer, and they start enumerating the network. They want to understand what different servers do you have, how is does the environment look like, what is the network. And this is an example taken from a domain controller, so we can see the different sign-in events from Windows. And when you're doing a network enumeration, like with Nmap or something, then you will see a lot of failed sign-ins or successful sign-ins, something like that. And this is one example of it. And what's interesting here is you can see the workstation name, which is the host name of the computer that the threat actor is using. And they're using Kali. So probably using the same thing like you are when you're researching and how to do CTFs or pen testing.
And one thing that could be said about this network enumeration is that they will also use the accounts that they have gained to access the VPN. They will use those accounts to actually enumerate the network. Yep. So that's why it's really, really bad idea to use admin accounts to log into the VPN, for instance.
Yeah, and in a lot of these cases, they were also able to RDP directly and move laterally within the environment with the same accounts. Yep. So you can see first network enumeration, and then they just log into another computer with RDP, and it's the same. It's the same account that they got from the beginning, and sometimes those accounts are even domain admins, and then they've already compromised the whole domain.
Exactly.
But at this point, like, they're logging in with the same way you are logging in with the Cisco AnyConnect VPN. They are RDPing. They're moving around exactly the same way as any system admin would. They're using PowerShell to kind of maybe query the Active Directory a bit, trying to understand a little bit more about the environment, jumping into file servers, just building an understanding pretty much. And of course, moving to the domain controller.
Yeah, exactly. And just one thing there, that the moving around is one of the kind of biggest misconceptions in network security, is that we use our firewalls and all the intelligence services to track these things, but the problem here is that we clearly see that the threat actors use legitimate traffic flows to attack your environment, which is really, really hard to defend against unless you do it the right way.
So if you segment the network, but you allow Windows type of traffic, then you haven't done. Then you won't block them, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next stage is that they are starting to install backdoors across the system. And here you might think that they are using some kind of advanced tool or some kind of malware, which they sometimes are. Yeah. Maybe they use Cobalt Strike and use that way to command and control. Yeah. But a big trend in the recent years is that they are using remote access tools that are commercially free, available tools. Yeah. Because they won't be detected by any antivirus. An EDR, like the Defender for Endpoint, something like that, might flag that you have this, but maybe you're using TeamViewer or something within your environment. And then if you are monitoring those yeah, maybe it will be detected and someone will take action on it, but a lot of times they won't because it's not malicious.
It's legitimate.
But in this case, it is malicious because a threat actor installed it. And what Akira really likes to use is AnyDesk. So this is just a screenshot of when I installed AnyDesk in my sandbox, but this is what it looks like for them as well. Yeah, it's free, easy to use, and it works for threat actors as well.
Exactly. Cobalt Strike is so 2019.
Yeah, it really is. But it's also, a lot of times we maybe see Cobalt Strike in the initial access, where they exploit something, they get a foothold, and then they use Cobalt Strike. But then when they're actually moving around in the environment, they're using Splashtop is another example.
Exactly. Let's go for it.
Yeah, and then, okay, so they've jumped around a little bit. I mentioned this before, that a lot of times they are already domain admin at this point, but sometimes they're not. And this is where how you have built the Active Directory is super important. So the thing that a lot of companies fail at is to do AD tiering. So they allow domain administrators to log into any server. And what this means is that when the system administrators are going around building and configuring things, they're using really high privileged accounts. And then when a threat actor logs into that computer, they can steal those sessions. I'm not gonna go into more details of how that actually works, but it does work, and that's why actually doing proper AD tiering, having different user account for different types of systems is so important, because this is just how Windows is built. There's no way around it. So as a system admin, you need to have a specific domain admin account. You need to have another user account to log into your laptop, and another to log into servers, and then a third maybe if you have Office 365 or cloud, something like that. It's super important, because otherwise you are very vulnerable to the lateral movement. And it's also very, very hard for a SOC to detect it, because they just see RDP from a normal high privilege account, which is normally how it looks like.
Exactly. So that's why when we talk about segmentation, we really emphasize on account segmentation rather than strictly subnetting, because if you have like 100 different subnets and all the servers are joined to the same domain, then you really don't have a segmentation. So that's why you really need to have account segmentations.
I remember we had a case where they were super proud of how they have segmented the whole environment, right?
Yes.
You remember the case? Yeah. And you looked at it and said, yeah, but they allow RDP. So.
Exactly. So
no, it's not really segmented.
That's the tunnel.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Okay, so now they have moved around. They own the entire domain. They have RDP, they have run the Nmap, they know how the environment looks like, and they pretty much have everything to actually do the encryption. This is when they want to gain some extra data to use in their extortion. And once again, they tend to not use any type of malware in this phase. Sometimes they do. Other threat actors like to use malware for exfiltration, but Akira and some others, they tend to use normal tools. So in this case, we have WinSCP, and they exfiltrate it via FTP. And here is a Russian FTP server that we saw in an incident. So yeah, they just RDP to one file server, and they copy a bunch of things, they put it in a zip file, and then they upload it to an FTP server. It is as simple as that. Sometimes there are more advanced methods where they use malware to automatically exfiltrate data from clients and servers. And that's a bit more like effective and destructive, but it also would trigger antivirus in some cases. So this method is actually preferred in a lot of ways, even though it's very manual. And now we come to the encryption phase. And I can mention before this, I kind of skipped over that, but a lot of times they do look for backups and try to destroy them. We've seen cases where they log on to a server that controls the robot that handles the tapes for backups, and they try to do destruction as well. And sometimes they succeed, and sometimes they don't succeed. But then when we come to the actual distribution of the ransomware, they pretty much have two main ways to do this. So either they target Windows, so they don't actually destroy the whole computer, they just encrypt everything on your system except for the Windows folder. So Windows will work, but all of your files will be gone, pretty much. And the other method is that they log on to the hypervisors, like the ESXi hypervisors, and then they encrypt all of the disks of the virtual machines on that. That's kind of like the two approaches. And then sometimes they do a combination of these. And if it's the Windows-based one, I'll show you an example of how it's distributed. But either they can do it with GPOs, or they can do it like via SMB, and I'll go into that as well. This is an example of just the command line that was used to encrypt all of the disks on an ESXi host. Yeah. And one thing that's interesting here is N, it stands for the amount of encryption they're doing. So this means that 5% of the file will be encrypted. And it's not just encrypting it 5% in the beginning, it's not 5% in the end, it's some kind of algorithm that determines it. But that means if you have really, really large files, you can actually carve out data from encrypted files as well. But they do this to kind of speed up the process, because if you fully encrypt everything on a whole system, then it's gonna take a lot of time. So you might actually be able to stop it before the encryption is completed. Exactly. And then we come to the Windows part, and this is just a screenshot of the Windows executable that they use. So if you remember, the one that they used on the ESXi was called E, and the one for Windows called W. I'm a forensic investigator, so I think this means Windows.
It's good to separate them, so you don't run the E on the Windows.
And I think they have versions for Linux too. I guess the ESXi kind of is Linux, depending on who you ask. But a lot of times they don't really bother target Linux systems, because they hit 95% of the environment with this, and that's good enough. And then they move on to another victim.
Exactly. Let's go.
Yeah. And I want to show this, because this is super fun. So this is actually the log that Akira is using. So when you're running Akira ransomware on a Windows system, I think you can enable debug mode, and this is the output if you run it with that debug mode. So we don't find this everywhere, but in one incident we found this, and I think they struggle a little bit with the encryption, and then for some reason they started with the debug mode. So here we can actually see how they target the different servers that they want to encrypt via, and then they encrypt each volume via SMB. So the built-in Windows feature, right? So because they have domain admin, they can access that computer with SMB, and then they can run this script, and then they can encrypt it.
And again, legitimate traffic flows.
Exactly. Legitimate tools, like PSXec is another example, but this is common. And now they've done it, right? They have exfiltrated data, they have encrypted the whole environment, and now it's time for them to try to make some money. So they move on to the extortion. And they use what is commonly called I forgot about the name, but they use the extortion in two different methods. So the first one is when is this one, right? Which you already saw. They tell you to please install Tor browser and go to this link, which is a chat, and then you can use that specific code, and then you will get in contact with their customer support, and then you can negotiate. Yes. And then the other method of extortion is through their leak site. So if you click again, on the leak site, they have this news section. So when they have breached a company, they will post about it here. And they say, okay, so at the 1st of October, we breached this chemical company based in US. And they use this in the extortion as well, because they will contact you again and say that, okay, well, we will remove your name from the site if you keep paying, if you pay us. Otherwise, we will post the data that we stole from you. And I have, like, all of this is public, right? They have already published this on the dark net, so, but I still wanted to censor it because I don't want to expose victims of these types of crime. But yeah, there is one Swedish one up there. And this is the part where they actually leak the data. After they have published it on the news section, they will wait a little bit to give you time to pay. And after you don't pay, which we, of course, encourage you not to pay them, they usually will upload the data here. And then you will press a download link, and then you will get the 50 gigs or 200 gigs of data, or whatever it is. And this is just open. It's you don't have to pay anything. You can download it, and then you have the data. So this is kind of like the last stage. Like, if the extortion failed, they will go, okay, we'll publish it. And what's really interesting, I think, on the next slide. Oh, okay, it wasn't this, but this is also interesting. So this is part of the extortion phase, where they will actually reach out to the victims via email. And this is not just sent to the victims. Again, I censored it because I don't want to expose anyone, but you can see the list of recipients. It's quite long, and it's not just people at that company. It's also business partners or organizations that they work with. So, and here they say that.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. Say, if you want it removed, we have to agree to something. So, yeah. This is them saying, you're on the news site, but if you don't want to end up on the leak site, or if you want to be removed completely, please pay. And then, okay, so what happens when you actually do pay and you say, well, please delete them? So we don't know about Akira, but this is from, I think, 1 or 2 weeks ago, where the Europol, Swedish police, and some others actually made a takedown of the Lockbit site. And one of the things that was published on the site was how the button that is available for the affiliates, the ones that are using the ransomware as a service, so then they have a button to delete the data, right? So if you pay, the affiliate that actually did the attack, they can press on this button in the ransomware service portal, and then the data will be deleted. But what the National Crime Agency, the British one, proved is that, well, this button really doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. And you can read the whole thing there. I'm not going to go through it, but they went into really a lot of details. And this is on Lockbit's official website, which they took down, which is quite fun, actually.
So even threat actors publish stuff before the software is finished, I guess.
Exactly. And let's see, how are we on time?
We are 2 minutes. So
2 minutes, perfect.
1 minute.
Great.
Even.
So we want to end everything with an example. So on the next slide here, what we usually do in these types of incidents is we draw out an attack map. And this is pretty much just what we already said in each of the phases of the attack. But we'll draw some arrows and put some icons there. But you can see they went in through Cisco, they had their Kali Linux machine, and then they did remote PowerShell stuff to one of the domain controllers. They exfiltrated the whole Active Directory database. So you might go home and think, what do we have in that database? It's usually quite a lot. And then they RDP'd to a bunch of systems. They exfiltrated data via WinSCP. They also installed AnyDesk, which I'm not sure why I forgot to write out here. And then they encrypted everything from the machines using SMB.
Yeah, definitely. So even if you're, they're not able to exfiltrate data, because that's not always the case, they would definitely have exfiltrate the AD.
Yeah.
So that's like bare minimum in every case. And we have seen cases where people have wrote in the passwords for different user accounts or service accounts in the description.
Phone numbers.
So there's still a lot of data that being leaked, even if they don't do a proper exfiltration. Right. Was that it?
I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you for listening.
We have a question actually right at the front, so can I get a microphone to this gentleman here, please? Just next to Dennis.
Hi, Christian. So I'm curious, what sort of, I mean, maybe you can't reveal exactly the kind of money we're talking about here, but like order of magnitude, when they're asking for ransom, how much is it?
I had a slide on that, but it's different, right?
Yeah, it's different. It's based on the revenue of the company, basically. So
Yeah.
we have seen cases where data have been leaked from the other side, so to speak, from the ransomware gang side, and they have kind of sorted the different victims based on their revenue. And it's a kind of a percentage of their
but it's in
yearly
millions.
Yeah.
Swedish
A
crowns.
revenue share model.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Definitely. So
Yeah. Then that's also why they ask you to go in and negotiate,
Yeah.
because they don't really put out pay 10 bitcoins or something like that
And
here.
exactly. And I think it was a couple of years ago, it was much more public what the extortion was and what they actually paid. But nowadays it's much more. It's harder to get that information.
There is this website called
Yeah.
Ransomware Negotiations,
Yeah, that's
where they
right.
have come across a bunch of leaked negotiations, where you can see like how much they initially asked and then how much the actual price was. It's usually like 50% of the initial one,
Yeah.
depending on how. Yeah.
But the largest one that I can remember during the time that I worked, it's 4 years now. I think it was $30 million.
Oh,
And that was only for the leaked data. So as I remember,
Yeah.
they didn't pay.
And then if you pay that, then
Yeah,
they will
that's,
come again and
yeah,
ask for more,
definitely.
right?
Yeah.
So exactly, if you pay for the decryption keys, maybe then they will come back and say, okay, well you have to pay more so that we don't release the data as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah. Can I ask one more question?
Yes, please.
So I'm curious about this. So you're saying the SMB sort of vector there for encrypting. Is this because, I mean, you're saying, right, that they're pulling the clear text files over SMB and then, no,
they're accessing. So if you want to open a file share, you open File Explorer, right, in Windows, and you type the IP address and then a $sign of your file share, then you will access that file share. Right. That's the exact same method they're using, and that works over the SMB protocol. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So but what I'm getting to is like, where does the encryption happen? Because I mean, are they pulling the data over, then encrypting it and putting it back?
No, it's being encrypted on the
So it's basically they use SMB to remotely execute. They move the ransomware, the encryption malware to the host and then encrypt it there. If that's the case.
I think that's the method here.
Yeah.
I'm exactly not
So
super
they use
sure how it
different.
works here.
They use different variants. of it.
But I think the most common method is actually via GPOs.
Yeah.
So then they distribute the ransomware like the w.exe.
Right.
You will find that binary on all of the systems that are
Yeah.
being executed. And then it's being encrypted locally, because otherwise it would be a huge bottleneck to send everything
Yeah,
to
that's
one.
exactly what I was getting to, right? I was
What you
curious about-
typically see if you have an EDR or something, or what you typically see is the ransomware executable being executed on every single system. So
That's when they do it on the host.
Okay, we have time for one final question over here.
Hello. Yeah, Kushal here. So the onion address you showed, it shows a TLS certificate was used, HTTPS. And if I remember correctly, there were only 2 organizations who were providing TLS for onion addresses. Did you look into that, or was it as like self-signed certificate? Because the previous screenshot was pretty old. I don't remember that icon, but then next one was the newer one, because I can see the TLS certificate correctly. So did you look into that?
You're right. The first screenshot was from, I think, when we had this presentation the first time, and then the second one was from a week ago when I took the new screenshots. I think it's self-signed, if I recall correctly, because you get this self-signed error when you try to log into the site. But they might change that.
Yeah, definitely.
Because they are also using a lot of different websites, because maybe something happens with this one, so they have a mirror on something else. And so there might be different methods. But I think it's self-signed.
Yeah, I think so too. But
Okay, so we've reached our time for this session, so please do join me in thanking Viktor and Heresh for a fantastic presentation. Thank you, guys.